What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 20 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest press conference information, look at your benching headaches, a weather report, answer some questions, and take a quick look at my team as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and get your picks submitted over on Sleeper and join the Let's Talk FPL Premier League Pick'em League. Link in the description below, and more to come on that later. So let's start with Newcastle. Eddie Howe said it's good news on Sven Botman. He's in and around my thoughts, and it's great to have him available again. So we may see him start at some point over the next few game weeks. I'd find it surprising if he plays against Spurs away, given how long he's been out for, but it's definitely a possibility. I think from an FPL point of view, he's 4.4 million. We'd need to see a run of games before we even think about bringing him in. And obviously players like Lewis Hall are way more attacking. The only slight thing that might happen is if you see a partnership of Schär and Botman centre-back over the next couple of weeks, Davern has to go somewhere, either left-back or on the bench. I think with how well Lewis Hall has been playing, Davern will get relegated to the bench, but it's not completely out of the question that Davern plays left-back. I don't want to put anyone off buying Lewis Hall because it's unlikely to happen. I'd put it at like less than 5%. But it is a possibility. But until Botman proves his fitness, there's nothing to worry about. Otherwise, all is okay from Man United. Trippier is fine after coming off. So for anyone that was thinking about going for Livramento, I just wouldn't bother because Trippier will take some of his minutes. And then Pope is back on the grass and his knee is in a good place. Not sure when he's going to be back, but I probably would just avoid Dubravka for now. So on the Liverpool defensive front, Ibrahima Konate and Conor Bradley are set to return to training today, and Joe Gomez is out for a few weeks. Now, I'd find it a bit surprising if Konate is straight back in against Man United at home, but it's definitely a possibility. Either way, if he's back in training today, he's going to be available in that first 11 quite soon, which basically rules Kwanzaa out as an option, even though Joe Gomez is going to be out for a few weeks. So right now, if I was buying any Liverpool defender, it would still be either Trent or Van Dijk. I think for everyone else, the minutes are too risky. Once Konate is fit, we know from earlier on in the season, he will start every single game, but I'd want to see him play a few games before I brought him in, I think. On Conor Bradley, obviously there is potential for taking minutes off Trent Alexander-Arnold, but I still think Trent is well worth the money. I think he will start pretty much every single game that he's fit for, and it's more likely that he comes off early rather than is on the bench. And just in case anyone is worried about Trent's minutes because of all this stuff going on with Real Madrid, Slot was asked if he can rule out Trent Alexander-Arnold leaving in January, and he said, I can tell you he's playing on Sunday. So we know at least one of the 11 against Man United, that will be Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Liverpool are insisting that he's not for sale in January anyway. So I don't think it's really playing on his mind all that much. He just got a 15-pointer against West Ham. You've got a double game week coming up, probably in 24 or 25. Ipswich are home in 23. Any game week you want to buy Trent over the next 4 or 5 looks pretty good to me. So don't forget, I'll be giving away another £50 Amazon voucher for whoever gets the most predictions in my Let's Talk FPL Pick'em League over on Sleeper for Game Week 20 specifically. You can download the app completely for free using the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on screen. All you have to do is predict whether it's going to be a home win, an away win or a draw for each match in the game week, and I'm going to submit my predictions right now. So although Newcastle have been very good recently and the Spurs defence is terrible, I'm actually going to go for a Spurs home win. Hopefully Dominic Solanke with a brace of goals. Maybe that is just very optimistic of me. Bournemouth to beat Everton for sure, and Villa to beat Leicester at home. Palace versus Chelsea is tough. Chelsea are very good this season, but they've always got a mistake in them defensively. And Palace have got players that can punish, like Mateta, Eze, Sarr, etc. So I'm going to go for a draw in that game. Again, hopefully Eze gets me some points. Man City to beat West Ham. Southampton-Brentford is interesting as well. Southampton may be playing a little bit better recently, but Brentford have got goals in them. I'm going to go for a draw there. Brighton-Arsenal, I'm going to go for an Arsenal win. I wouldn't be surprised if Brighton takes some points home from that game. Fulham to beat Ipswich. Liverpool to beat Man United, unfortunately. It's very rare that I will back against Man United. And then Wolves versus Forest. I'm going to go for Forest, away win against Wolves. I think Wolves are playing all right at the moment, but Forest have just been decent all season. That's all you have to do. Whoever gets the most predictions for Game Week 20 will win that £50 Amazon voucher. If more than one of you have the same amount of predictions, I'll do a random draw on the next deadline stream, probably in Game Week 21. Link in the description below, or scan that QR code on screen. Completely free to play. Get going now. So for Arsenal, this was the headline info from Mikel Arteta. Ben White could return to action before the end of the month. Kai Havertz is expected to be fit for game week 20 against Brighton, and then Raheem Sterling most likely to be back the week after next. With Sterling, I don't really expect a huge impact from an FPL point of view. He's hardly had any minutes so far in the league this season. On Havertz, him being back and Nwaneri starting right wing in the last game would basically put me off of any Arsenal attacker that's not Ødegaard due to minutes. And you might not want to buy Ødegaard because of the price. I completely get that. I'm not going to buy him either. But he's the only one I'd be confident of starting every single game and getting decent minutes. Like, it might be that if Havertz is back and fit enough to start, that he plays in midfield and Gabriel Jesus continues playing number 9. But it's not completely impossible that Havertz just plays as the 9. You could have Partey, Rice and Ødegaard as the midfield. And then Nwaneri could start on the right again. You've got Martinelli and Trossard on the left. I just think they're all a little bit of a worry from a minutes perspective. If I was buying any Arsenal attacker that wasn't Ødegaard, I probably would go for Jesus because I think at less than 7 million, that's quite a nice punt. He's played really well recently. The returns are there as well. That might keep him in the team. I'm just saying there's potential risk there moving forward. And then with Martinelli, I think he's ahead of Trossard in the pecking order. And again, for less than 7 million, that's probably where I would go. Nwaneri for me at 4.5, potentially incredible value, but there's no way we can guarantee that he keeps starting, so I just wouldn't look there right now. So Jesus and Martinelli, I do not mind as punts because of their price. I'm just saying that with Havertz back, that just adds another body into the mix in terms of how they might line up week to week. And obviously with Saka not there, Arteta might try a few different things. With Ben White, that doesn't have a massive impact right now, but longer term, it might be that Timber and Calafiori see less minutes, but I really wouldn't worry about it too much at this point. By the time that Ben White is a problem, you'll probably be looking at taking out some of your Arsenal defenders anyway. So for Spurs, Ange Postecoglou confirmed that Destiny Udogie has a hamstring injury and he's going to be out for about 6 weeks. That's another big blow to the Spurs back four. Udogie out, none of the injured players back yet, so that includes Romero and Van de Ven. So 3 of the back 4 are missing. If you've got Udogie still, he's got to go, and you're not buying any Spurs defender anytime soon. If you've still got Porro, which I've seen some people have in their team, and you can bench him for 2 weeks, then maybe play him against Everton away and Leicester at home. If that covers some of your other defenders, fair enough. But Porro at 5.5 million just does not feel like good value when I don't see Spurs getting many clean sheets anytime soon. And then Postecoglou also ended with, we've had an illness bug running through the squad, so a few have missed training. I've got no idea who those players are, no idea if they're going to be available. The same thing happened to Arsenal before the Brentford game, and the only major player from FPL that missed out was Havertz. So hopefully if you've got Johnson, Maddison, Solanke, whoever it is, they will start. But I guess with Maddison, it's no guarantee anyway because his minutes have been all over the place for this season. So basically, don't buy any Spurs players this week would probably be the general advice. If you've got them, like Solanke, maybe Brennan Johnson, someone like that still, I think I would play them unless we get more news ahead of the deadline. So when I asked for questions for this video, I also asked for any benching headaches as well. And I took a note of some of the players that people weren't sure about. And I've put them in order of who I would play, basically. There are a couple of players I'm not completely sure about and the decision is quite close. But I'll talk about that as we go through. So if you've got Raul Jimenez, you've got to play him against Ipswich at home. Is there a small chance that Muniz will play instead? Of course. But that game is too good to turn down. So you definitely play Jimenez. If you've got Semenyo, I think he should be ahead of pretty much any defender you've got as well, or at least any defender that you're thinking about benching, because Everton at home is a decent fixture. I would have Sarr ahead of João Pedro, just because I see Chelsea at home as a bit easier than Arsenal at home. So even though João Pedro has the penalties, Sarr's got really good numbers at the moment. His minutes are decent as well. So I would have Sarr in third place, then João Pedro ahead of Enzo Fernandez. On paper, Crystal Palace away is definitely easier than Arsenal at home. But João Pedro's numbers better this season, and you've got penalties as well. And he's just played 4 back-to-back 90 minutes, so the minutes look pretty decent. The only defenders I've got ahead of Amad Diallo are Castagne and Andersen at Fulham. And obviously, if you've got Robinson as well, he would be included. But I just assume if you've got Robinson, you're definitely playing him. And that's because they've got Ipswich at home, whereas Amad Diallo is playing against Liverpool away. Most of the time, I don't like playing defenders ahead of attackers. But in this case, it's not that I think a Liverpool clean sheet is guaranteed, but I just don't see Man United scoring that many goals in the game. And I think the clean sheet perspective for Fulham, or potential for Fulham, looks pretty good. So I'd maybe have Amad just behind the Fulham defenders, but if you wanted to play him instead, obviously that's your choice. Then I'd have Rico Lewis, West Ham at home. I think he will probably start again. Then I've got Konza or any Aston Villa defender that should start because they've got Leicester at home. On paper, that's a decent fixture. Then Munoz against Chelsea at home. I've got him ahead of Lewis Hall, and I know everyone's going to hate how low down this list Lewis Hall is, but I just see Chelsea at home as better than Spurs away. No matter what you think about Spurs and how hit and miss they can be, they've scored the second most amount of goals this season, only behind Liverpool, and I think they're only 4 goals behind or something like that. So the chances of Newcastle getting a clean sheet, despite how well they've been playing, despite how Botman might be back soon, just doesn't seem all that high. And I know Lewis Hall is attacking, but so is Munoz as well. So I would definitely have the Palace defender ahead of him. And then I've got Colwill last, Crystal Palace away, just because he's not all that exciting from an attacking perspective, and I would expect Crystal Palace to score. So if you want to play Lewis Hall ahead of any of these players on the list, you should absolutely do that. But I think there's a bit of overestimation about how good he is based on recent results. And I just think with a defender, primarily you want those clean sheets. And I just don't see one against Spurs. So this isn't something that I usually include in these videos, but a few people asked me to talk about the weather because there have been snow and ice warnings over the UK and Ireland for this weekend, and some people are concerned that matches might not go ahead. I've got this snippet of an article from the BBC website. As a quick summary, I don't expect any games to be called off this weekend, so you're probably going to be okay, but let's just quickly go through it anyway. So snow and freezing rain forecast could result in power cuts, travel disruption, and some rural communities being cut off. For what it's worth, most stadiums are fine with weather like this, right? Undersoil heating and stuff like that, not a problem. It's usually the travel that causes more of an issue with why games get called off sometimes. So that's what we're really mostly worried about. So the weather warnings include a yellow warning for ice covering nearly all of Scotland, including the Orkney and Shetland Islands, northwest England, so obviously Liverpool playing against Man United on Sunday, East Midlands, parts of North Wales and northern areas of Northern Ireland from 4 p.m. on Friday until 10 a.m. on Saturday. So that's probably not going to be an issue because the matches on Saturday are 12:30 onwards and the early kickoff is Spurs versus Newcastle. So it's in London anyway. So as long as Newcastle can get there, there shouldn't really be too much of a problem. And obviously that warning doesn't affect the Sunday games because it's gone by Saturday. Yeah, Saturday at 10 a.m. An amber warning for snow and ice for central England and most of Wales from 6 o'clock Saturday evening until noon on Sunday, likely bring in hazardous travel conditions. So that one could potentially be a problem, but because it's 6 onwards on Saturday, the rest of the games will already have kicked off, and the late kickoff on Saturday is Brighton versus Arsenal. Now, I'm not great at geography, but the warning says central England. That probably doesn't include London, which is where Brighton versus Arsenal, well, it'll be in Brighton, right? But it's going to be a little bit further south of London. Like I said, I'm terrible with geography, so I don't think that's going to be much of an issue either. This is the one to maybe be the most concerned about. An amber warning for snow covering northern England from 9 o'clock on Saturday evening until midnight on Sunday. So that would cover the time that Liverpool are playing Man United. And obviously, Liverpool is in northwest of England. I looked at the temperature because I saw someone else talking about this. It never gets below freezing. So in terms of having like ice, where it's really difficult to get to stadiums because you shouldn't drive, it's difficult to walk on and stuff like that, it's probably not going to be an issue. And if it is just snow, rather than that below freezing ice, travel will still be possible, or at least I wouldn't expect it to be enough to get called off. Now, obviously, I'm recording this on Friday afternoon. Things could change overnight. If you can, wait until as close to the deadline as possible to make your decisions so we get an update on the weather warnings, how the weather is, and stuff like that. But I don't think any of those bullet points I've spoken about, and the last one is about Scotland anyway, are going to cause any games to be called off. The one most at threat right now is probably Liverpool versus Man United, but unless there's travel disruption for people being able to get to the stadium, I really don't see it being a massive concern. If you want to play it ultra safe, avoid buying players for these two teams and make sure that you've got a bench. And because most people will be captaining Salah this week, just make sure your vice captain is on Saturday. And for most people, that's just going to be Cole Palmer anyway against Palace away. And that game is in London at 3 o'clock on Saturday. So there's maybe some concern there, primarily about Liverpool, Man United, but outside of that, I don't see the weather being a massive problem. Wait until the deadline if you can to make your decisions. But like I said, unless there's massive travel disruption on Sunday, I think that game will probably go ahead. So let's get into some of your questions. What would be your priority sell for those of us with Rodgers, Timber, Cunha and Bruno Fernandes? And I suspect a lot of people watching has a combination of those players, if not all four. For me, I think the main priority for me would probably be to get rid of Cunha. We know he's suspended for that Forest at home game in game week 20, and the fixtures do get a lot worse afterwards. Newcastle away, bearing in mind everyone's telling you how good Lewis Hall is right now. Then it's Chelsea away, Arsenal at home, Villa at home, Liverpool away. And as always happens when a player goes on a really good run, the comments start, he can score against anyone, he's in form, forget about XG. It always catches up with you. And it's not to say that Cunha, if fit, is a terrible option, but he is much worse than he's been with this great fixture run he's had. So I would look to move him on first. Then I would probably say Timber. He's only suspended for one game, but I think Arsenal are not as much of a priority to own as maybe they would have been over the last few weeks because their fixtures are getting tough as well. For what it's worth, there is still a chance Arsenal will pick up clean sheets along the way. And until Ben White is back, I don't really see a huge concern about Timber's minutes. So he's not someone I would look at in most people's squads and say, I've got to get rid of him. But if you've got this combination of players, I don't think it's the worst time to jump to a different defender instead. Fulham one, for example, Lewis Hall for the long term, whoever it might be. Bruno Fernandes and Rodgers, I actually found them quite hard to split. The reason I put Rodgers last is because I still think he's a great enabler. And I don't think for the most part, unless you're really stuck for players, it's worth spending transfers moving around 5 to 5.5 million midfielders. So that's why I've got him as the least priority to sell. Bruno Fernandes obviously has Liverpool away this week, but he's available. So you know he's going to play, unlike Cunha and Timber. So I think it's hard to put him above those two players. And then the fixture run is just quite good. And I know people are still banging on about Bruno Fernandes every time I mention him, but I think people are playing down just how good the fixture run is. I've seen a comment like, I wouldn't even pick Man United players if they were playing Accrington Stanley. But if we're being serious for a second, between 21 and 29, bearing in mind 29 might be a blank for some teams, but not Man United, they play all of Southampton, Ipswich and Leicester, albeit Ipswich is not until 27, Leicester's not until 29. But before that, Brighton at home, Fulham away, Palace at home, Spurs away, Everton away, is not that bad for a nailed-on player. And since game week 10, and yes, I am using the point where he got the 10-pointer against Chelsea, even if you include the red card, he's on something like 6.4 points per game. Like, what's the problem for his price at 8.3 million? So, obviously, you probably wouldn't buy Bruno this week because it's Liverpool away. But if you've got him, and you've got Cunha and Timber, I see those two players as bigger priorities to get rid of. And I'm deadly serious that I will consider getting Fernandes back in game week 21. It's not a guarantee, but I think he's a good option. I'd much rather have Fernandes long-term than someone like Ødegaard. So is Gakpo worth the minutes risk? In terms of output, he looks to be the next best forward in FPL right now after Isak. So I knew he'd started a few games in a row, but I didn't realise quite how many. So he started every match for Liverpool since game week 12. That's 7 game weeks in a row, and he's got 4 goals, 1 assist. So the output has been decent. I personally would worry a little bit about the minutes. He played 90 against Leicester in game week 18, and 72 against Man City in game week 13. Otherwise, every other game in that 7 game week spell is under 70 minutes. And also, we've got to bear in mind that Jota wasn't fit during most of that time, and he's starting to build up his fitness. So even if Jota's not ready to start right now, that just means earlier and earlier benchings for Gakpo. So that would worry me. Also, there is no chance, personally, I would buy Gakpo this week because not only is there minutes risk long term, but he's also on 4 yellow cards. And for Liverpool and Everton, the players have still got to get through game week 20 before their threshold goes up to 10. So if Gakpo does start against Man United and gets a yellow card, he will then definitely miss game week 21. And personally, I just don't think he's good enough to take that risk. It's likely that he just won't get that yellow, of course, just like Nicholas Jackson didn't, etc. But if he did, then the minutes really would be bad for 21. Then you've let Jota get more minutes and build up his fitness, and it's just a concern long term. I get that people want a second Liverpool attacker rather than defender for that potential double in 24 or 25 and the Ipswich home game in 23. But personally, I'd rather just wait until closer to the time to make the move so you've got the most information about what the fitness is like for all their attackers, who's getting the most minutes and stuff like that. So Gakpo could continue that output. I don't think he's really worth buying this week. So you've talked about Castagne versus Andersen for Fulham, but is there any reason to avoid having both? And I think at the moment the answer has to be probably not. Like, one reason you would avoid doubling up on a defence like Fulham is, although they are pretty good, they're not an elite defence like Liverpool and Arsenal, so you wouldn't necessarily want to play them every week. But at 4.2 million, that's probably not what your intention is. And also, because of the fixture run they've got, there isn't really too many weeks for quite a while where you wouldn't want, not necessarily where you wouldn't want to play both, but if you had to play both, it wouldn't be a major issue. So Ipswich at home this week, then West Ham away, Leicester away, Man United at home, Newcastle away, Forest at home. It's not a perfect fixture run, but if you got stuck because your defenders got suspended or injured and you had to play both of those players in any of those games, it really wouldn't be a massive concern. And the other reason I don't mind it is because I'm sat there with Andersen and my fifth defender is Greaves. So if my fifth defender was Castagne instead, I'd be pretty happy. So I don't think you've got to go out of your way to get both of those Fulham defenders. But if you need a cheap option at that price or below, it's really hard to look past either of them. The only slight negative potentially is game week 29 when they play Spurs at home. And that will be a blank game week for whoever gets through to the Carabao Cup final. So if Spurs got to the final, then they would both blank, and that might cause an issue. But it's likely that Spurs will go out and not be in that final. It's not impossible, of course, but the likelihood is that Liverpool will probably win over 2 legs, and that therefore that Spurs game will be on. And look, if you had to play Castagne and Andersen against Spurs at home in a week where some players are going to be missing, it really wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think if you want to double up, it's fine for the most part. So nice and simple, would you keep or sell Ødegaard? I think the answer to this question probably depends on how many transfers you're currently sat on. If you've got 3 to 5 transfers and nothing else to do, then fair enough. If you're sick of Ødegaard already, then you can look to move him on to someone else. If you've got 1 or 2 transfers, I would question whether or not it's worth it. Like, I see Ødegaard as similar to Solanke in my team. Am I super enthused about having him? Not really. But do I see a massive standout option that I've got to move to in game week 20 specifically? Not necessarily. And I think it's the same with Ødegaard. I know a lot of people really like Anthony Gordon right now. And if I was making a midfield change, he'd be one of the top options I'd look to bring in. But is he miles better than Ødegaard specifically for game week 20? I'm not convinced he is. And another week's worth of information, an extra transfer to spend in 21, could be quite valuable. Remember that we will have the FA Cup third round results between 20 and 21 and the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-finals. So in most situations, I'd probably lean more towards holding Ødegaard. He has underwhelmed since people brought him in, like 0.25 expected goals versus Ipswich, 0.13 expected assists. It's fine, but also Ipswich was a really good fixture. And then against Brentford, 0.03 XG, 0.18 expected assists. Not great. And also, Nwaneri took corners. So Ødegaard wasn't even on most set pieces in that game. So I'm not sure he's someone I'd buy right now. But I think with the fixtures they've got coming up, he's not like a huge problem. I think for a lot of people, I'd rather just roll the transfer rather than get rid of him this week. So I'm going to end by quickly talking about my team. And literally nothing has changed since the team selection video yesterday. I'm really happy with how things are set up. I don't think I need to use a transfer this week. So I've got Raya and Gabriel double up on Arsenal defence against Brighton away. Not necessarily expecting that clean sheet, but I also don't really want to sell them to any other player this week specifically. I'm playing Andersen over Munoz. Andersen not quite as attacking, but I think clean sheets are the bread and butter for any defender. So I'm definitely going to go for a Fulham defender versus a Crystal Palace one. And then Trent makes up my back 3. I've got Palmer vice-captain and Salah captain. As I mentioned earlier, there is maybe a very tiny chance of the Liverpool-Man United game being called off, but not enough that I'm worried about it whatsoever. But Palmer is playing on Saturday, so he is my vice. He would have been my vice-captain anyway, for what it's worth, despite the 3 blanks in 4. Got Eze versus Chelsea at home, Mbeumo versus Southampton away, who I'm quite excited about this week. He's not a massive differential, like less than 10 or 20% owned, but he is much lower owned than he would have been earlier on in the season. That's a really nice fixture, and I'll decide what to do with him from game week 21 onwards. I'm playing Isak against Spurs away and Solanke versus Newcastle at home. Solanke with no Fabian Schär because he's suspended this week, and possibly Botman not being up to full fitness could be interesting. We might see a Kelly and Dan Burns centre-back partnership. It doesn't mean that I think Spurs will walk all over Newcastle, but it does help a little bit. So I'm happy enough to own Solanke for another week. And again, like in Burma, I decide what to do with him moving forward. And then I'm playing João Pedro ahead of Munoz just because I don't necessarily think that Palace will get a clean sheet. In a week where there is maybe a slight worry about games being called off. It's even more annoying that Rodgers got his suspension. And one thing I didn't mention in the team selection video is I could look to move Rodgers to someone else, but to do that I would have to make a second move. So like Solanke down to Chris Wood would let me do Rodgers to Sarr. And I know a lot of people would rather have Sarr and Chris Wood moving forward. I personally would value having the transfers more. So rather than have Sarr basically over João Pedro and then Chris Wood instead of Solanke, I'd rather have 3 transfers next week instead of just 1. And I also think as enablers go, Rodgers is probably still one of the best. Like Enzo's fine, Ahmad's fine, but I don't think they're better than Rodgers and certainly not worth using a transfer on. And I got Rodgers at 5 million. So if I sell him to Sarr at 5.8, I'm then using even more money out of the rest of my squad. So I'd just rather roll the transfer, basically. And I'll have 3 next week and I'll decide what to do. I may well roll it again. So that's my team. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and get your picks submitted over on Sleeper. Link in the description below. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream.